She belonged nowhere until one man saw the woman behind the labels. The coffee was already cold. Nadia had not noticed. She was sitting at the window table of a small cafe on Clement Street, the one with the cracked wooden sign above the door that nobody had bothered to fix in years, her fingers resting on her keyboard without pressing anything. The cursor blinked on the empty document. It had been blinking for 40 minutes. Outside, the street was doing what streets do in the morning. A woman walked a dog that was too big for its leash. A delivery van blocked half the road while the driver argued on his phone. Two teenagers moved past the window laughing at something on a screen. The city was loud and certain of itself, moving with the kind of confidence that Nadia had spent most of her life pretending to feel. She was 29 years old. She had a degree in communications, a job she was good at but did not love, a studio apartment that smelled like the candle she burned to make it feel like a home, and a way of entering rooms that she had spent the better part of a decade perfecting. Shoulders back, smile ready but not too ready, voice at the right volume, never too much, never too loud. Never the version of herself that her mother called difficult, and her last workplace had described in a performance review as enthusiastic to a fault. She still had that review. She did not know why she kept it, maybe because it was proof of something she had not yet named. A man at the counter ordered something complicated. The barista repeated it back wrong. He did not correct her. He just nodded and paid. Nadia watched this and felt something move through her chest, some small, sad thing. She looked back at her screen. She was supposed to be writing. Not for work, this was something else, something she had been attempting every Tuesday morning for the past 3 months, a personal essay. She had read somewhere that writing your own story was a way of reclaiming it. She had believed that, or wanted to believe it enough to buy a new notebook and set a recurring Tuesday alarm. But every time she sat down, the page stayed empty, and she sat there feeling like a person trying to start a car with no key. The problem was not that she had nothing to say. The problem was that every time she tried to begin, she heard other voices first. Her mother's voice, low and accented and full of love that expressed itself mostly as worry and criticism. "You are too sensitive, Nadia. You make everything so complicated. Why can't you just be easy?" Her ex-boyfriend Colin's voice, even impatient in the way that people are patient when they have already decided something but have not said it yet. "You want too much. You need too much. I can't keep up with you." Her old manager at the agency, a woman named Patricia, who had once pulled her into a glass-walled office and told her, with the warmth of someone delivering a favor, that Nadia was a lot to manage, and that she might want to consider toning herself down if she wanted to move forward in the company. 3 different voices, 3 different people, same sentence. Too much. She had heard it so many times that she had stopped questioning whether it was true. When a word gets repeated enough by enough different mouths, it stops being an opinion and starts feeling like a fact, like a diagnosis, like something stamped on the outside of a box before it gets shipped somewhere and left on a shelf. The cursor blinked. She reached for her coffee, cold. She drank it anyway. A woman at the table beside her was reading a book, a thick paperback with a creased spine, the kind that had clearly been read more than once. She had a pen in her hand and was underlining things. Nadia noticed her notebook, the one sitting open beside the book, and felt a small, familiar pang. The woman had filled her pages. Actual words, actual thoughts, actual marks made by someone who had decided that what she thought was worth putting down. Nadia looked at her own open notebook, blank. She had drawn a small spiral in the bottom corner, which did not count. She closed the notebook. She had started coming to this cafe because it was not close to her apartment or her office, which meant that no one she knew was likely to walk through the door. She could be anonymous here. She had found over the years that anonymity was the closest thing to rest she could reliably give herself. Among people who did not know her labels, she could sometimes breathe differently, longer, slower, without the reflex of managing how she was being received. At home, she was the daughter who had moved too far and called too rarely, and made choices her mother could not understand. At work, she was the one who had to be handled carefully, whose ideas were good but whose energy was a bit much. In her last relationship, she had been the problem that needed solving until Colin had decided she was a problem that could not be solved. She did not know who she was in this cafe. That was why she kept coming back. The woman with the filled notebook closed her book and stood to leave. On her way out, she paused beside Nadia's table. "I love your notebook," she said. "The cover is beautiful." It was a simple thing to say. Friendly, passing, the kind of small kindness strangers offer when they are in a good mood and the morning is going well. Nadia felt her body do the thing it always did. A quick scan, a rapid internal calculation. Why is she saying this? What does she want? Is this a setup for something? Is there a punchline coming? Oh, Nadia said, thank you. She did not say, I picked it out myself. I stood in the stationery shop for 12 minutes holding this one in one with a blue cover, and I chose this one because the color reminded me of the walls in my grandmother's house, which was the last place I can remember feeling completely safe. She said, oh, thank you. The woman smiled and left. Nadia looked at the notebook. She turned it over, ran her thumb along the edge. She caught her reflection in the cafe window. A woman sat there in a good coat with good posture, looking like she had it together in all the ways that matter from the outside. Nadia stared at her for a moment. The woman in the window stared back. They looked at each other the way strangers do when they cannot quite place where they have met before. Then a truck passed and the reflection was gone. Nadia opened her notebook. She wrote one sentence. I don't know who I am when no one is watching. She stared at it for a long time. The cursor on her laptop blinked in her peripheral vision. Outside, the city carried on, unconcerned. The barista called out an order. The dog on the leash barked once and then was quiet. She did not write anything else that morning. But she did not cross out what she had written. She left it there, that one sentence sitting in the middle of an empty page, the only true thing she had managed to put down in 3 months, and she closed the notebook and gathered her things and put on her coat. The walk back to the train took 7 minutes. She counted them. She often counted things when she needed to feel like she was in control of something: steps, breaths, the number of red doors she passed on a given street. It was a habit she had developed a long time ago, in a house where the atmosphere could change without warning, where knowing the exact number of steps from her bedroom to the front door felt like important information. She had never told anyone about the counting. She had never told anyone about a lot of things. The train was crowded. She stood holding the overhead rail, pressed on all sides by people who did not notice her and whom she did not notice. She was thinking about the sentence in her notebook, about the woman in the window who had looked like someone who had it together, about the review Patricia had given her, about Colin's voice, even impatient, about her mother saying, "You make everything so complicated, Nadia. Why can't you just be easy?" She thought about all the rooms she had walked into and calibrated herself for, all the versions she had assembled on short notice. The professional one, the easygoing one, the one that did not want too much or ask too much or feel too much out loud. She had become very skilled at this. The skill had cost her something. She was not entirely sure what. Only that when she reached inside herself to find the original version, the one before all the calibrating, she had to reach quite far, and sometimes she was not sure she was finding the right thing. The train stopped, people got off, people got on. Nadia held the rail and rode toward the part of the city where she lived alone in an apartment that smelled like a candle she burned, so it would feel like a home. She was 29 years old. She did not yet know that in 4 weeks she would be standing in someone's kitchen, holding a glass of wine she was not really drinking, and a man she had never met would ask her a question that would follow her home and sit on the edge of her bed and change, quietly and without her permission, the entire direction of her life. She did not know any of that yet. She just held the rail and counted the stops. The invitation came from a woman named Claire, who had been Nadia's closest friend since a shared elective course in college, where they had both shown up on the wrong day and spent 20 minutes in an empty classroom before anyone corrected them. Claire was warm and funny and had a talent for gathering people, for filling a room with a particular kind of ease that made everyone feel chosen. When Claire threw a dinner party, people came. When she said, "You should meet my friends," she meant it, and her friends were usually worth meeting. Nadia almost did not go. She had spent the week in the particular kind of exhaustion that was not physical. The job had been heavy. A presentation she had prepared carefully was praised in the meeting and then quietly restructured by someone senior without her input. The version they used kept her data, but not her framing, not her voice, not the part of it that had felt like her actual thinking. She had sat in that meeting and smiled in the way she had learned to smile, the one that said, "I am fine with this, and I am a team player, and I do not have opinions about how my own work is handled." She had gone home and reorganized her bookshelf. This was something she did when she could not locate what she was feeling. She would take all the books off the shelves, stack them on the floor, and put them back in a different order, first by color, then alphabetically, then by year of publication. It did not help her feel better. It gave her hands something to do while the feeling moved through her slowly, the way weather moves through a room when you leave a window open. By Friday, she had reorganized the shelf twice. She texted Claire that she might be tired. Claire texted back a voice note 3 minutes long, which Nadia listened to while eating cereal for dinner, that ended with the words, "I am not taking no for an answer. Come for an hour if that's all you have, I need you there." She went. Claire's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had once been a warehouse. The ceilings were high. The furniture was an interesting mix of things Claire had bought, inherited, and found. The kitchen table was too big for the kitchen, and everyone always ended up crowded around it, which was, Nadia suspected, entirely intentional. There were 8 people there. Nadia knew 3 of them. She spent the first 20 minutes in the kitchen helping Claire with things that did not need helping, which was how she eased herself into rooms when she was not sure of them yet. Claire's boyfriend, a tall, gentle man named Greg, introduced the guests she did not know. There was a woman named Paula who worked in landscape design and had very strong opinions about gravel. There was a couple, Owen and Diane, who had recently moved from Portland and kept referencing it in a way that made clear Portland was a personality. There was a quiet man with gray at his temples who was standing near the window looking at Claire's bookshelf with his arms folded and his head tilted slightly to one side, the way people look at things they are genuinely interested in. His name was Marcus. Greg said he worked in restorative design, which Nadia did not immediately understand, and that he and Greg had met through a community project 3 years ago. Greg said Marcus was one of the most interesting people he knew, which was the kind of introduction that should have felt like too much pressure but somehow did not, because Greg said it simply without theater. Marcus turned from the bookshelf and said hello. He had a calm face, not blank, calm, which is a different thing. His eyes moved with attention. He shook her hand and said Nadia after Greg said her name, the way people do when they are actually filing the information rather than letting it pass through. She filed him under, interesting but not her business tonight. She was here for an hour. She was going to have a glass of wine and love Claire and go home. Dinner was loud and warm in the way Claire's dinners always were. Paula had very strong opinions about the gravel in Claire's small balcony garden. Owen and Diane disagreed with each other twice about Portland in a way that suggested this was an ongoing renegotiation. Greg told a story about a near disaster with a ceiling fan that had everyone laughing hard enough to put down their forks. Nadia laughed, she meant it. Claire was watching her across the table with the particular look that said "I told you so" about the coming, and Nadia smiled back in a way that conceded the point. Marcus sat 2 seats away from her. He did not talk over people. He did not perform his opinions. When he spoke, he said what he meant in short, complete sentences and then stopped, which was a thing Nadia noticed because most people, herself included, talked slightly past their actual point out of some reflex need to fill the space. He did not fill the space. After dinner, the group moved to the living room in the natural drift of full people and finished wine. Conversations split and shifted. Claire got pulled into something with Diane. Greg and Owen started talking about football. Paula was examining a plant on the windowsill with professional concern. Nadia was standing near the kitchen door with her glass, deciding how much longer her hour was, when Marcus came and stood beside her with the easy manner of someone who was not trying to start anything, just standing nearby. They talked first about Claire's bookshelf because it was visible from where they stood and was objectively unusual. Claire organized her books by the emotion she felt when she finished them, which meant that mystery novels sometimes sat beside self-help, and poetry was scattered throughout based on a logic only Claire could navigate. Marcus had noticed this before dinner and found it delightful. Nadia said she found it slightly stressful, which was honest, and he laughed, which was real. They talked about the neighborhood, about the warehouse building, about the way cities kept converting the things that made them interesting into the things that paid better. He asked what she did. She told him. He nodded and said, "Do you like it?" She paused. People did not usually follow up that way. Usually, the information was received as information, and the conversation moved on. "Some of it," she said. "Which parts?" She thought about this. "The parts where the thinking is mine," she said. He looked at her, "and those parts are getting smaller." She did not answer immediately. She took a sip of her wine. "Why would you assume that?" "I didn't," he said. "You said some of it. Most people who like their work say most of it." She looked at him. He was not being clever. He was not trying to impress her. He was just paying attention, which turned out to be enough to disarm her completely. They talked for a while longer. about small things and then about slightly larger things. At some point, Nadia said something self-deprecating about her tendency to overthink, the way she always did when she felt herself being too visible, offering the smaller version before someone else could decide she was too much. It was an old reflex, a preventative measure. Marcus did not laugh it off. He did not say, "Oh, I'm sure you're not that bad." He said, "What were you like before you learned to be careful?" The room kept going around them. Greg said something that made Owen laugh. Paula had moved from the plant to a conversation with Claire. The apartment was warm and full and ordinary. Nadia stood there and felt the question land somewhere below her ribs, in the place where things land when they are true. She laughed, reached for the deflection she always kept ready. Said something light about being a handful since birth, which was the story she told, the one that made the real answer safe by turning it into a joke. Marcus smiled. He did not push. He said, "I'll believe that when I see evidence." She did not know what he meant by that. She did not ask. Claire appeared and pulled Marcus into something on the other side of the room, and Nadia stood there by the kitchen door a moment longer, her wine glass cool in her hand, the question still sitting in her chest where it had landed. "What were you like before you learned to be careful?" She left 40 minutes later, said her goodbyes, hugged Claire, put on her coat in the hallway. Marcus said good night from across the room. He said it the way he said her name the first time, simply, like he was recording it. She walked down 3 flights of stairs and out into the night air. The question rode home with her on the train. It sat in the overhead rack above her head. It followed her up the stairs to her apartment. She made tea she did not drink and changed into comfortable clothes and sat on her bed and looked at the wall. What were you like before you learned to be careful? She reached for the counter, the thing she did when she needed to steady herself. 12 steps from the front door to the kitchen, 7 from the kitchen to the bedroom. The bookshelf had 23 books on the top row. She had reorganized it twice this week. She lay back. The ceiling offered nothing useful. She thought about the girl she had been at 14, before the reviews and the breakups and the calibration. She had been loud then, genuinely loud, not performing loudness. She had laughed at things that struck her as funny without first checking whether they were the right things to find funny. She had filled notebooks with her actual thoughts instead of sitting in cafes with an empty cursor blinking. She thought about the woman in the window of the cafe, the one who looked like she had it all together. She had stopped recognizing her somewhere along the way. Her phone lit up, a message from Claire, a short one. "Marcus asked about you after you left, I'm just saying." Nadia looked at the message for a long time. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. She lay in the dark for a while, the question sitting on the edge of her bed, not going anywhere, patient in a way that felt different from other questions she had ignored. She did not answer it. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, she did not change the subject inside her own mind either. She let it sit. She closed her eyes. Outside, the city moved on without her, and she breathed at a length she had not managed in some time, slow and almost steady, in the dark of an apartment that smelled like a candle she burned so it would feel like a home, which it was beginning, very slowly, to feel like. She saw him again 11 days later. Claire had arranged it, which Nadia understood but chose not to name out loud. Claire had texted to ask if Nadia wanted to join a small group for coffee on Sunday morning, casual, no pressure, just a few people. The text arrived on a Thursday. Nadia spent 2 days deciding and then said yes, which felt like a small act of courage and probably was. The coffee was at a place near the park, a table outside. Claire was already there with Greg and a woman named Sophie whom Nadia had met once before and liked immediately. Marcus arrived last, slightly breathless, carrying a jacket he had not yet put on, apologizing for the bus that had taken longer than promised. He saw Nadia and said her name again, the same way, like he was glad it was still there. She noticed this and told herself she had not. It was a good morning. Easy the way mornings can be when the weather cooperates and no one has an agenda. They ordered too much and shared it. Sophie told a story about a disastrous camping trip that became funnier with each detail. Greg drank 3 coffees and became progressively more enthusiastic about everything. Claire kept catching Nadia's eye and not doing anything with it, which was its own kind of comment. Marcus sat across from Nadia. He talked when he had something to say. He listened the rest of the time with the same quality of attention she had noticed at the dinner, the kind that felt like he was actually receiving what was being said and not just waiting for the next place to speak. At some point, the group split into two conversations the way groups do, and Nadia found herself talking to Marcus about something that started as books and became, without her tracking how, the thing she had written in her notebook. She did not tell him about the notebook, but she said in a slightly roundabout way that she sometimes felt like she spent most of her energy managing how she came across to people, and that she was not entirely sure there was anything left over that was just for her. She said it lightly, with a half-smile, the way she said things that were true, buffered just enough to seem like they might not be. Marcus did not respond immediately. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the middle of the table for a moment, and then he looked at her and said, "That sounds exhausting." Not, "I'm sure it's not that bad," not, "Everyone feels that way sometimes," not, "You seem fine to me." Just, "That sounds exhausting." She felt something move in her chest, something that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but was adjacent to both of them. "It is sometimes," she said. "What would happen," he said, "if you stopped managing it just once for a morning?" She thought about this. "I don't know. I've been doing it for a long time. I'm not sure I remember how." "What's the earliest you remember doing it?" The question arrived quietly. It did not feel like a trap. It felt like the kind of question someone asks when they actually want to know the answer. She thought about her mother's kitchen, Saturday mornings when she was maybe 10 or 11, standing at the counter while her mother cooked, feeling the atmosphere and reading it the way a sailor reads weather, checking the set of her mother's shoulders, the angle of her head, whether the radio was on, learning to adjust herself based on what she found, learning to be the version that helped the room instead of complicated it. She did not say all of this. She said, "Young." He nodded. He did not push. "The thing is," she said, and then she stopped because she had not planned to continue, but the sentence had started and something in her did not want to close it off the way she usually closed things off. "The thing is, I think I got very good at it, and now I'm not sure which parts of the way I am are actually me, and which parts are just what I became because it was necessary." She looked at her coffee cup. "That was more than I meant to say," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm glad you did." She looked up. He was not performing concern. There was no performance in him that she could locate. He just sat there, warm and unhurried, a person who had asked a question and received an answer and was treating that as the gift it was. She felt the reflex fire. The one that said too much, "Nadia, you said too much again." The one that sounded like Colin and Patricia and her mother all at once. She felt the familiar urge to walk it back, to add a joke, to downsize what she had just put on the table. She did not do it. She sat with it, the discomfort of having been honest, the strange way it felt more like ground than the performances did, more like something solid under her feet, even though it frightened her. They talked for another hour. The conversation moved through other things, lighter things. He made her laugh twice, genuinely, the way she had laughed at 14 before she learned to check first. He told her about the project he was currently working on, a community center in a neighborhood that had been told for decades it did not deserve nice things. He talked about it with a quietness that was the opposite of small. He cared about this. She could hear it. She walked home afterward through the park. The morning had turned bright, the kind of light that makes familiar streets look new. She walked slowly, her hands in her pockets, the park sounds moving around her, children and dogs and someone doing yoga on a blanket with calm, incongruous discipline. She was thinking about what she had said. Which parts of the way I am are actually me. She had never said that to anyone before. Not to Claire, not to her therapist, whom she had seen for 8 months 2 years ago before deciding she was fine. Not to Colin, who she had tried to be easier for until easier had felt like disappearing. Not to herself, out loud in a way that counted. She had thought it many times. She had felt it in rooms and on trains and at kitchen counters. But she had not said it because saying things made them more real, and more real was frightening when the thing being made more real was a question you did not know the answer to. She had said it this morning over coffee with a man she had met 12 days ago. The sky was extremely blue. A child ran past her on the path, shouting something to another child too far ahead, laughter already starting before they arrived. Nadia stopped walking for a moment. She stood on the path in the good light and breathed, long and slow, not counted. Something had shifted, she could not name it exactly. It was not resolution. It was not the arrival of an answer. It was something smaller than that, and she suspected more important. It was the sense that there was a question worth asking, and that asking it out loud to another person had not ended the world, had not confirmed the worst things she feared, had not resulted in the expression she dreaded, the one that said, "I knew it, you are a lot." It had resulted in, "That sounds exhausting. And I'm glad you did." She started walking again. By the time she got home, she was not sure what to do with what she was feeling. It was too large for the apartment. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the bookshelf through the doorway. 23 books on the top row. She had reorganized it twice already this week. She did not reorganize it. She made tea, she sat on the sofa, she opened her notebook. She read the sentence she had written in the cafe 3 weeks ago. "I don't know who I am when no one is watching." Below it, slowly, she wrote a second sentence. "Maybe that is the only person worth finding out about." She looked at the two sentences together for a long time. Then she closed the notebook and held her tea with both hands and sat in the quiet of her apartment, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she was not performing anything at all. Not even for herself. There was nothing to manage, no room to read. No atmosphere to match, just her and the apartment and the tea cooling slowly in her hands and the faint sound of the city outside, going on as it always did, entirely indifferent to the fact that something small and important was happening in here. That was all. But it was more than she'd had yesterday. She let that be enough. 3 weeks after that morning in the park, Nadia and Marcus had settled into something that did not have a name yet, which she was careful not to name, because the moment she named it, she would have to decide what to do about it, and deciding things was not the part she was frightened of. It was the part that came after deciding, the part where you stepped forward and the floor was either there or it wasn't. They met for coffee, then for a walk that went nowhere in particular, then for dinner at a small place on a side street that Marcus knew and she had not been to, where the menu was short and the chairs were slightly mismatched and the food was the kind that made you stop talking for a moment when you first tasted it. She talked to him differently than she talked to other people. She did not know when this had happened. She noticed it the way you notice a habit after it is already formed, in retrospect, with a slight sense of having been outmaneuvered by your own instincts. She had not set out to talk to him honestly. She had set out to do what she always did, manage the impression, give the good version, keep the complicated parts for later or for never. But he asked questions that were difficult to answer dishonestly, not because they were designed to catch her out, but because they were the kind of questions that assumed she had a real answer and waited for it. He asked things like, what did you actually want to do when you were young before anything practical got involved? And when was the last time you did something that was only for you, not for how it would look or what it would lead to? And once, over coffee on a Tuesday afternoon, he had looked at her in the middle of a sentence she was giving him the edited version of and said, gently, "That's the version you tell people, isn't it?" She had stopped mid-sentence. He had not said it as an accusation. He had said it the way someone might point out that you have taken a longer route without knowing it. Informational, mild. She had sat there for a moment and then laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes out before you decide whether it should, and said, "Yes, how did you know?" "There was a small pause before you started," he said. "Very small, I don't think most people would notice it." She looked at him. "I notice things about you," he said simply, without attaching anything to it. She did not know what to do with this information. She filed it somewhere she could return to later, which was a thing she did with things she was not ready to open yet. They kept meeting. She kept noticing that she was not performing in the way she usually performed. She kept waiting for the moment when the comfort of this would flip, when being seen so clearly would start to feel like exposure instead of ease. She knew the difference between the two. Exposure was when someone saw you and you could tell from their face that the information was not welcome, that the real version was the problem version, that you had made a mistake in being visible. This did not feel like that. This felt like being in a room with enough light in it. She did not say this to him, she thought it and lived with it. She told Claire cautiously that she was spending time with Marcus. Claire, to her credit, did not make a production of it, only said, "I'm glad," Nadia, quietly, and with a seriousness that felt like she understood more than she was saying. Nadia did not ask what she understood. She did not want to put words on it yet. Then the voices came back. They always came back. It was a Wednesday evening. She was sitting at her kitchen table after a long day at work, a day that had involved another meeting in which her contribution was absorbed into a larger conversation and attributed in the summary email sent afterward to the group generally, which meant to someone more senior specifically. She was tired in the bone-deep way. She was eating toast for dinner because she had not been able to make a decision bigger than toast. And the voices came. Not literally, not in the way that would require a different kind of help, just the familiar internal weather, the accumulated language of the people who had told her what she was. Colin's voice, you want too much, you need too much. You are exhausting to love, Nadia, you take up so much space and you do not even know you are doing it. Her mother's voice, why can't you just be easy? Why does everything have to be so complicated with you? You always do this. You make everything harder than it needs to be. Patricia's voice, measured and kind-shaped, you are a lot to manage. You might want to consider toning yourself down. She sat at the kitchen table with her toast going cold and let the voices do their thing, which was to remind her of everything Marcus was eventually going to find out. That she was too much. That she wanted more than people could give. That she complicated things. That the version of herself she had been showing him, the one that felt more honest than any version she had shown anyone in years, was actually just another version, and when he saw underneath it, he would find what Colin and Patricia and her mother had found, the part that was genuinely a lot, genuinely difficult, genuinely a problem to manage. She thought about the way he paid attention to her. She thought about how frightening it was. Not because it was bad, because it was real, and real things could be taken away. She thought, I should stop before this goes further. The thought arrived with a strange sense of relief, the kind of relief that is actually the feeling of a trap closing, which she recognized but could not seem to refuse. This was familiar ground. She knew how to do this. She knew how to begin creating distance so gradually that it felt like the distance had always been there. She had done it before. After Colin, yes, but before Colin too, with a man named Patrick who had been gentle and funny and had started to know her too well, and she had found reasons to be unavailable until he stopped trying. She was good at this. She did not return Marcus's call that Thursday. Or Friday. Or the text he sent on Saturday, carefully worded, no pressure in it, just, hope you're doing okay this week. She read it 4 times, she typed 3 different replies, she deleted all of them. She reorganized the bookshelf. Color orders, then alphabetical. Then she sat on the floor surrounded by books she had pulled off the shelves and did not put them back. She sat among them for a long time, her back against the wall, the books around her like an interrupted conversation. She thought about what she was doing. She was doing the thing, the disappearing thing, the preemptive one, the wound protecting itself before anyone else could reach it. She knew this, knowing it did not stop it. That was the frustrating thing about the patterns she had learned in a house where the atmosphere changed without warning. They were very good patterns. They had kept her safe when safety was not guaranteed. They did not know that she was 29 now and the house was far away and the thing she was protecting herself from was not danger. It was the possibility of being genuinely known and still chosen. Which was, she understood, sitting on the floor among her scattered books, the one thing she had never let anyone get close enough to give her. Sunday came. She sat at the kitchen table in the morning with coffee and her notebook open and tried to write, and what came out was not an essay and not a journal entry, but something that looked like a list of accusations she had believed about herself for so long that she had stopped noticing they were accusations. Too much, too loud, too sensitive, too complicated, too hard to love. She looked at the list. She thought about Marcus saying, that sounds exhausting. She thought about him saying, I notice things about you. She thought about the question that had followed her home from Claire's dinner party, that had sat on the edge of her bed, that she had been slowly, all these months, beginning to answer. What were you like before you learned to be careful? She picked up her phone. His last message was still there, hope you're doing okay this week. Saturday, 11:43 a.m., 3 days ago. She held the phone. She thought, I am going to do the wrong thing again. She thought, I am so tired of the wrong thing. She typed, I'm sorry for going quiet. I would like to explain if you'll let me. She sat very still after she sent it. He replied within 3 minutes. Name the place, I'll be there. She put the phone down and looked at the list of accusations in her notebook. She drew one careful line through all of them. Not because they had stopped hurting, not because she had proven them wrong, just because she had decided, in the quiet of a Sunday kitchen, that she was done letting other people's old conclusions about her run the decisions she made today. The line was thin, the words were still visible beneath it. That was fine. She was not trying to erase anything. She was just trying to stop letting it steer. She chose the cafe on Clement Street. Not for any particular reason she had consciously prepared, but when Marcus asked her where, that was the place that came to her first, the one with the cracked wooden sign, the one where she came on Tuesdays to try to write and usually failed, the window table, the cold coffee, the blinking cursor. It felt right to go back there. She arrived 8 minutes early, which was unusual for her. She was rarely early. Being early required a kind of confidence in your own welcome that she had not always possessed. She ordered tea this time. She sat at the window table. She put her hands flat on the table and looked at them and breathed. She had thought, on the walk over, about what she wanted to say. Not the edited version, not the managed one. The true one, which was also the one she had been most afraid of saying out loud, not because it was terrible, but because it required her to show something that she had kept folded up and put away for a very long time. Marcus arrived at exactly the time they had agreed. She saw him through the window before he saw her. He was walking with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face turned slightly upward the way he did, she had noticed when he was thinking. He had a specific quality of stillness even in motion, like he was carrying the quiet with him. He came through the door and saw her and smiled. Not a social smile, just a genuine, small, glad-to-see-you smile, the kind that happened in the eyes before the face did anything. He sat down across from her. He ordered coffee. He did not say anything right away. He waited, which was a thing she had come to understand about him. He did not fill silences to manage them. He let them be what they were. "I went quiet," she said. "You did," he said. "I do that," she said. "It's a thing I do. When something starts to feel real, I start looking for the exit, not because I want to leave, because leaving first is something I understand, being left is not." She had not planned that last sentence. It came out whole, from somewhere below the prepared version, and she let it. He looked at her across the small table. The cafe moved around them. Someone laughed near the counter. A chair scraped. The ordinary morning carried on. "How old were you," he said, "the first time someone left before you were ready?" She thought about this. She thought about her father, who had not left dramatically, who had not slammed a door or made a scene, who had simply become less and less present over the years until his absence was complete without anyone having formally named it. She thought about the way her mother had covered this by becoming very busy with expectations. She thought about the particular silence of a house where someone is technically present but not there. "Young," she said. He nodded. "I'm not going to tell you that I won't leave," he said. "I don't think promises like that are something anyone can actually keep. People change, circumstances change, but I can tell you that disappearing is not something I do. I don't go quiet. I don't create distance and call it space. If something is wrong, I say so. If I'm having doubts, I would tell you. You would not have to guess." She looked at him. "That's not a guarantee," he said. "It's just who I am." She understood the difference. She was grateful for the distinction. False guarantees were something she had received before, and she knew the texture of them, the way they felt like solid ground and turned out to be something drawn on the surface of water. This was not that. This was, "Here is what I am. You can verify it by watching." "I have a lot of things," she said, "that I've been told are problems. I talk too much when I'm nervous. I think about things longer than most people. I care about things very specifically, and sometimes it comes out as intensity that people find overwhelming. I overthink, I underexplain, I reorganize my bookshelf when I can't find what I'm feeling." She paused. "I've been told I'm a lot to manage." He said, "By people who wanted to manage you." She went quiet. She had not heard it that way before. She had heard the verdict, but not the position from which it was issued. She had accepted the judgment without questioning what it revealed about the judge. A lot to manage, said by people who had approached her as something to be managed. She turned this over. "I don't want to manage you," Marcus said. "I want to know you. Those are different things." She had spent 29 years hearing her most honest self described as a burden. She had heard it enough to start carrying it not as someone else's opinion, but as established fact. And here was someone across a cafe table on an ordinary morning, not with grand declarations or theatrical reassurance, just with the steady, clear voice of someone who had thought about what he was saying before he said it, offering her a different frame. She did not burst into tears. She did not make it a moment. She picked up her tea and drank it and looked at him. "Okay," she said. Such a small word for such a large shift. He did not push it further. He did not expand on it or celebrate it or look for what the word meant beyond what it was. He just nodded and picked up his coffee, and the conversation moved into other things, easier things, the kind of conversation that two people have when they have said the important stuff and are glad to be in the same room. They stayed for nearly 2 hours. Walking out afterward, they stopped on the pavement while he checked his phone for a message he was expecting. Nadia turned and looked back through the cafe window, the window table. The seat she had sat in on that Tuesday months ago, the one where she had written one sentence in a blank notebook. "I don't know who I am when no one is watching." She thought about the sentence. She thought about the woman she had seen in the reflection that day, the one she had not quite recognized. She thought she might recognize her a little better now. Not because anything had been solved. Her mother still called and said the wrong things. The job was still a place where her thinking got borrowed without acknowledgement. The voices still came on tired Wednesdays. She still reached for the counting sometimes. The bookshelf had been reorganized twice this month already, and she doubted it would stop. She was not a different person. She was the same person beginning to take up her own space without apologizing first. Marcus put his phone away and looked at her. "What are you thinking about?" She turned from the window. "A sentence I wrote a while ago," she said. "I think I'm almost ready to write the next one." He did not ask her to explain it. He did not need to. He just looked at her with the expression she had come to understand meant that he was listening even when no words were coming. They walked together down the street, through the ordinary morning, past the dog that was too big for its leash, and the delivery van blocking the road, and the two teenagers bent over a screen. The city moved on the way cities do, indifferent and constant and full. Nadia moved through it upright. Not performing, not calibrating, not reading the atmosphere or choosing the version or managing the impression. Just walking, just present, just hers. There was still so much she did not know about what came next. There was still the long work of unlearning the voices, of choosing differently on the tired Wednesdays, of reaching for honesty when the reflex reached for distance. There was still her mother's phone number and her contacts and all that came with it. There was still the job and the missing acknowledgement and the question of what she actually wanted to do with her days when she got to choose. There was still the original question, the one that had followed her home from a dinner party and sat on the edge of her bed. What were you like before you learned to be careful? She was starting to find out. Slowly, on her own terms, without editing the answer before she had found it. The street opened ahead of them, long and full of the morning. She had nowhere to be for the next 3 hours. The notebook was at home on the kitchen table. The cursor was not blinking. The page was not empty. She had things to say. She was going to write them down. Not for anyone else, not to prove something, not to be the version that made things easy or manageable or toned down. Just because the thoughts were hers. Just because she had decided, quietly and without ceremony, on a Sunday morning in a kitchen that smelled like a candle she burned to make it feel like home, that she was done being a footnote in the story other people told about her. She was going to tell her own story now. Starting with the true first sentence. The one that had been waiting for her all along.